She lived in silence, crafting jewelry, unaware that destiny was watching her. He arrived as a student but carried secrets. When their lips touched for the first time, the past awakened like fire hidden beneath the embers. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. Among the peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where mist dances with rocky summits and time seems suspended like golden honey, there exists a village that few know and even fewer dare to visit. It's there, in that forgotten corner of Virginia, that Emma Mitchell grew up without knowing that the surname she carried concealed secrets capable of burning entire lives. The jewelry workshop stood at the end of the only paved road in the village, a stone and wood construction that withstood time like one guarding ancestral secrets. The thick walls muffled the sound of hammer against metal, creating a sanctuary where Emma crafted wedding rings for people she didn't know, in distant cities she had never visited. Each piece that left her hands carried an almost supernatural perfection, as if she could capture in gold and silver something that words could never express. Grandma Hope, who had raised her since infancy, was a woman of few words and many mysteries. Her wrinkled hands knew fire as well as they knew silence, and it was from her that Emma inherited not only the ability to transform raw metal into art, but also an emotional distance that protected her from the world like an invisible armor. There were never unnecessary caresses, long embraces, or sweet words. There was only work, discipline, and an absence of affection that Emma accepted as natural, without knowing there was another way to live. At 23, Emma had never kissed a man. Her hands knew the heat of furnaces, the weight of precious metals, and the delicacy needed to sculpt the impossible. But they didn't know the touch of another's skin, the warmth of an embrace, or the vertigo of a passionate gaze. She was a virgin in body and soul, a woman who molded symbols of eternal love without ever having experienced even a teenage crush. The village respected and feared her in equal measure. Some whispered that she had the gift of foreseeing the future through the jewelry she created. Others said her rings could unite or separate couples according to her will. Emma neither denied nor confirmed the rumors. She lived wrapped in mystery like wearing a cloak, finding in it a protection she had never questioned. Across the country in New York City, where glass skyscrapers cut the sky like blades and money flowed through the city's veins like contaminated blood, Ethan Morgan woke every day at 5 in the morning with the same nightmare. He saw flames. He smelled smoke. He heard screams that could be from his dead wife or from his own conscience shattering. The Morgan Diamonds empire had been built upon generations of ambition and emotional coldness. Ethan had inherited not only the fortune, but also the curse that seemed to pursue the men in his family, the inability to love without destroying. At 35, he commanded businesses on 3 continents, possessed more money than he could count, and a reputation that made ministers and presidents answer his calls at any hour. But none of that mattered when the sun set, and he found himself alone in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by luxury he could no longer feel. Isabel had died 2 years ago in a fire that consumed the family's country house in the Hamptons. The official report indicated electrical failure, but Ethan knew the truth that no investigator had discovered. She was running away, running from him, from his betrayals, from his coldness, from the golden prison he had built around her with prenuptial contracts and clauses that prevented her from having a life of her own. On the day of the fire, Isabel had packed her jewelry and was preparing to leave when the flames reached her. Now Ethan carried in his chest a guilt that grew like cancer. Doctors said his symptoms were psychosomatic, chronic insomnia, panic attacks, visions that made him wake up screaming in the middle of the night. He had tried everything: conventional therapists, renowned psychiatrists, even healers who charged fortunes for empty promises. Nothing worked. Guilt was a ghost that haunted him during the day, and a beast that devoured him during the night. That's when he met Dr. Thomas Whitman, a psychiatrist different from all the others. In his office on the Upper East Side, surrounded by old books and musical instruments, the doctor listened to Ethan's story without taking notes, without prescribing medications, without offering easy solutions. He just listened, and then, with a calmness that bordered on indifference, said something that would change everything. "You need to reconnect with matter, Ethan. You need to feel the weight of things, the texture of real life. There is a place where this is still possible, where people still create with their hands and live with their hearts. I'll give you an address. It's not a suggestion, it's a medical prescription. Ethan received a paper with the name of a village that didn't even appear on digital maps, and a woman's name, Emma. No additional explanation, no promise of healing, just a scribbled address and the feeling that his life was about to take an irreversible direction. 3 days later, driving a BMW down the dirt road that led to the village, Ethan felt for the first time in years something different from guilt and emptiness. He felt fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of himself. Fear of discovering that not even there, at the end of the world, could he find the peace he was looking for. The black BMW stood out like a scar amidst the simplicity of the village. Ethan parked in front of the jewelry workshop without knowing that he was about to cross an invisible line between the man he had always been and the one he would become. The mountain air was different from New York's, denser, laden with humidity and ancient secrets that seemed to whisper through the century-old trees. The workshop door was ajar, letting escape a golden light that contrasted with the grey mist of the afternoon. Ethan pushed the door slowly, like someone entering a church for the first time, and was greeted by the rhythmic sound of hammer against metal. The environment immediately engulfed him. Stone walls covered with tools that seemed to have crossed centuries, wooden benches marked by time and fire, and a smell of heated metal mixed with something indefinable, almost magical. Emma had her back turned, bent over a piece that shone under the light of the furnace. Her brown hair was tied in a messy bun, revealing the delicate curve of her neck, where small drops of sweat shimmered like pearls. She wore a leather apron over a simple blouse, and her hands, those hands that Ethan would soon discover, were capable of transforming not only metal but also hearts, moved with a precision that bordered on dance. She didn't turn when he entered. She continued working as if she knew he would arrive, as if his presence had been expected for years. The silence extended for long minutes, broken only by the crackling of fire and the metallic sound of the hammer. Ethan, accustomed to commanding boardrooms and having his presence immediately acknowledged, felt for the first time in decades completely ignored, and that disconcerted him more than it should have. "You must be the man from the big city who came to learn to use his hands." Her voice was low, husky, with a soft Appalachian accent that seemed to caress the words. Emma finally turned, and Ethan had the sensation of looking directly at something wild and untouched. Her eyes were brown like earth after rain, and there was in them a depth he couldn't decipher. It wasn't coldness, it wasn't hostility, it was something more disturbing. Absolute indifference. "Ethan Morgan," he introduced himself, extending his hand in an automatic formality that he soon realized was inappropriate in that environment. Emma looked at the extended hand without making any move to touch it. "Emma," she said simply, as if last names were unnecessary luxuries. "Dr. Whitman called me. Said you need to learn to work with your hands, to heal your soul." There was a subtle irony in her voice, as if she doubted that someone like him was capable of such a thing. She approached him for the first time, and Ethan could smell the scent emanating from her skin, a mixture of fire, metal, and something purely feminine that made his stomach contract in a way it hadn't felt in years. Emma studied him with her eyes, as if he were a piece of metal she needed to evaluate before deciding if it was worth working with. "Your hands are very smooth," she observed, taking one of his hands without asking permission. The touch was brief, technical, but sent an electric current up Ethan's arm that made him tremble imperceptibly. "They've never really worked. We'll change that." During the next 2 hours, Emma initiated him into the mysteries of fire and metal with a patience that contrasted with her apparent coldness. She taught him to light the furnace, to recognize the right color of flames, to hold the hammer with the exact pressure. Her instructions were precise, economical, but there was something in her proximity that made Ethan constantly lose concentration. When she guided his hands, correcting the angle of the hammer or adjusting his grip, the touch was professional, necessary, but left an invisible burn on Ethan's skin. She didn't seem to notice the effect she had on him, or pretended not to notice with impressive mastery. She always maintained a millimetric distance, touching only when absolutely necessary, speaking only the essential. "Why do you do this?" Ethan asked suddenly in the middle of an explanation about types of metal alloys. "Do what?" Emma paused and looked at him with a genuinely curious expression. Live here, alone, creating things for people you'll never meet. He gestured around the workshop, trying to encompass not just the physical space but the entire life she had chosen. Emma was silent for a long moment, as if the question had caught her off guard. When she finally answered, her voice carried a melancholy she tried to hide. "And why did you live in your big city, surrounded by people, creating wealth for those who already have plenty?" The answer hit him like a punch. Ethan realized he didn't have an answer, or that all the answers he could give would sound hollow in that environment. They looked at each other for a moment that seemed to stretch for hours, and something changed in the air between them. A subtle tension, like a gold thread being stretched almost to breaking point. "I'll prepare a room for you at Mrs. Martha's boarding house," Emma finally said, breaking the spell. "We start early tomorrow and bring clothes that can get dirty. That suit won't last 2 days here." Ethan left the workshop with the sensation of having just awakened from years of sleep. His hands, for the first time in decades, ached, not from guilt or anxiety, but from honest work. And there was something else, something that scared and excited him at the same time. For the first time since Isabel's death, he had spent 2 hours without thinking about her even once. Mrs. Martha's boarding house was 3 blocks from the workshop, in a yellow colonial house with blue windows, and a garden where chickens scratched freely among wild rose bushes. Ethan had never slept in such a simple place. Thin walls that let through all the night sounds, a shared bathroom in the hallway, and a twin bed that creaked with every movement. But for the first time in years, he slept without nightmares. He woke before dawn to the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of freshly brewed coffee rising through the floorboards. Mrs. Martha, a 60-year-old woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, was already waiting for him in the kitchen with a steaming cup and a plate of still warm biscuits. "Young Emma said you'll be staying here for a while," she commented, studying Ethan with the natural curiosity of someone who lives in a small town where any novelty becomes a topic of conversation for weeks. "It's good for her to have someone to talk to. That girl lives too alone since Hope died." Ethan almost choked on his coffee. "Her grandmother died. When?" "About 6 months ago." Heart stopped suddenly. Poor thing. Emma didn't cry at the funeral, you know. She just stood there hard as stone without shedding a tear. People commented, of course. "They say she has a heart as cold as the metal she works with." Mrs. Martha lowered her voice as if telling a secret. "But I think she just doesn't know how to cry. That Hope raised the girl in hardness, without much affection. Now Emma has to learn to be human on her own." The comment stayed in Ethan's mind throughout his walk to the workshop. When he arrived, Emma was already working as if she had never left. Today she wore a simple white blouse that highlighted the natural tan of her arms, and there was something different in her behavior. A subtle tension that wasn't there the day before. "Today you'll make your first ring," she announced without preliminaries. "Nothing elaborate, just a simple silver band. But it has to be perfect." The following hours were sweet torture. Emma guided him through each step of the process with a proximity that made Ethan's breathing change. When she leaned over his shoulder to show the correct technique, he felt the heat of her body and the subtle perfume of her skin. When she took his hands to correct the movement, his skin burned for hours after the touch. "You're not concentrating," she observed for the 3rd time, after he hammered the metal with the wrong intensity. "It's hard to concentrate when you're so close," Ethan responded without thinking, and immediately regretted the honesty. Emma completely stopped what she was doing and looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. For a moment, he thought she might send him away, but instead, she took a step back and said with a slightly hoarser voice, "Then I'll keep my distance." The rest of the day passed with an exaggerated physical distance between them, but the tension only increased. Each accidentally crossed glance, each exchanged word. Each moment of silence carried a weight that neither knew how to handle. Ethan realized he was completely losing control of the situation, something that hadn't happened in decades. During the lunch break, while Emma prepared a simple sandwich in the small kitchen attached to the workshop, Ethan wandered around the corners of the room and made a discovery that left him uneasy. On the floor, almost erased by soot and years, was a symbol engraved in stone. 2 interlocking circles with a triangle in the center. He knew that symbol. "Emma!" he called, pointing to the mark on the floor. "What is this?" She approached and looked at where he was pointing, and for the first time since he'd met her, Ethan saw an expression of genuine vulnerability on her face. "I don't know," she lied, and he knew it was a lie. "It's always been there. Grandma Hope said they were old scribbles without importance." But Ethan knew they weren't scribbles. That was the Morgan family crest, engraved in stone. The same symbol that was on his mother's wedding ring, on the company's official stamp, on the oldest documents of the family heritage. What was it doing there in that lost workshop in the Virginia interior? "May I ask what was your grandmother's maiden name?" "Her maiden name?" He tried to sound casual, but Emma wasn't fooled. "Why do you want to know?" The defensiveness was back in her voice, like armor she quickly donned when feeling threatened. "Curiosity." Ethan lied too. "You seem familiar. Maybe our families knew each other in the past." Emma studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read his true intentions. "Mitchell," she said finally. "Hope Mitchell. But she came from far away, from the Hampton area." She never talked about her family. The surname said nothing to Ethan, but the symbol on the floor continued to bother him like a thorn. During the rest of the afternoon he worked mechanically, part of his mind focused on the ring he was creating, and part lost in theories about impossible connections between his past and this mysterious woman. When the day ended, Emma surprised him with an invitation. "Want to see the sunset? There's a place on the mountain where you can see the entire valley." They walked in silence along a steep trail that wound between eucalyptus trees and giant ferns. The air was fresh and fragrant, and gradually the tension of the day gave way to something more serene. When they reached the lookout, a rocky clearing high on the mountain, the sun was already low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "This is where I come when I need to think," Emma said, sitting on a smooth stone. "When Grandma died, I spent entire nights here." Ethan sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, but feeling her presence like a magnetic field. "It must have been difficult to be alone." "I've always been alone," she replied with a simplicity that broke his heart. "The difference is that now, I know I am." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was then that Emma, without warning, asked, "Why did you really come here, Ethan? And don't tell me it was just to learn to work with your hands." The question caught him off guard with its brutal honesty. Ethan looked at her profile illuminated by the golden light of dusk, and, for the first time in years, decided to tell the complete truth. The truth came out of Ethan like blood from an open wound. He told about Isabel, about the marriage that was more a commercial contract than a union of love, about the betrayals he committed out of boredom and coldness of heart. He spoke about the night of the fire, about how she was running away from him when the flames reached her, about the guilt that had consumed him since then like acid in his veins. Emma listened in absolute silence, without judgment, without cheap advice, without the platitudes everyone else had offered. She just listened, with her eyes fixed on the horizon where the stars were beginning to appear one by one. When he finished, exhausted by the confession, she remained quiet for long minutes. "You think you killed her," she said finally. "It wasn't a question. I did kill her. Maybe I didn't light the fire, but I killed her just the same. With my indifference, with my betrayals, with my inability to love." Ethan's voice was hoarse with emotion. "She was running away from me when she died, Emma. Running from the monster I had become." Emma turned to look at him for the first time since he began speaking. Her eyes glittered in the growing darkness, like precious stones. "And you think coming here, learning to work with metal, will bring her back? Will erase what you did?" The question was raw, direct, without the softening he was accustomed to hearing, and somehow that brutal honesty was more comforting than all the sweet words he had ever heard. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he admitted. "I just know it's the only place where I can breathe without feeling like I'm going to suffocate." Emma stood up and extended her hand to him. "Let's go back. The mountain gets dangerous in the dark." During the descent, she walked ahead, sure as a mountain goat, while Ethan occasionally stumbled on loose stones. When they reached the workshop, she lit an oil lamp that bathed everything in a golden, intimate light. "I want to show you something," she said, heading to an old trunk in the corner of the workshop. From inside it, she removed a black velvet case that she opened with reverent care. Inside was a necklace of intertwined gold and silver, with a pendant that made Ethan's blood freeze in his veins. It was the same symbol engraved on the floor, but worked in precious metal with a mastery that bordered on perfection. The two interlocking circles shone in the lamplight, and the central triangle seemed to pulse like a metal heart. "This belonged to my mother," Emma said, touching the piece with an almost religious delicacy. "It's the only thing I have of hers. Grandma Hope kept it for me all these years, but never let me wear it. She said it was dangerous." Ethan swallowed hard. "Dangerous how?" "I don't know. She never explained. She just said there were old stories linked to this piece, stories of love and death that were better left in the past." Emma closed the case carefully. "But sometimes I take it out just to feel that I have some connection to her, to who I really am." "You never knew what happened to your mother?" Emma shook her head. "Grandma Hope said she died when I was born, but never gave details. She never talked about my father either. I grew up thinking I was an orphan of everything, even of my own parents." Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. The necklace, the symbol, the workshop that had belonged to the Morgans, everything was beginning to form a pattern that terrified him. But before he could fully process his suspicions, Emma did something that completely changed the course of the night. She approached him, so close that he could count each eyelash around her brown eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied, and meant it literally. "Teach me what it's like to kiss someone." The question hit him like lightning. Ethan looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of joke or manipulation, but found only raw and honest vulnerability. "Emma, I've never kissed anyone," she continued, her cheeks blushing slightly. "Never touched a man beyond what was necessary for work. But since you arrived here, I keep wondering what it would be like." Ethan felt all the air escape from his lungs. Part of him knew that this was dangerous, that he wasn't there to seduce an innocent woman, that there were too many secrets between them. But another part, the part that had been dormant for years, awakened with a force that surprised him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarser than intended. In response, Emma took another step toward him, completely eliminating the distance between their bodies. He could feel the heat emanating from her skin, the smell of fire and metal mixed with something purely feminine that made his head spin. Ethan raised his hand slowly, as if she were made of crystal and could break at the slightest sudden movement. He touched her face with his fingertips, tracing the delicate line of her cheekbone. Emma closed her eyes and leaned into the touch, like a flower seeking the sun. "Is it like this?" she whispered. "It's a start," he replied, bending over her until their lips almost touched. He could feel her breath against his mouth, warm and slightly trembling. The first kiss was soft, tentative, as if they were both learning a new language. But when Emma's lips parted in an involuntary sigh, something broke inside Ethan. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more desperate. Emma responded with a passion that surprised him, her hands rising to his hair, pulling him closer. It was as if years of solitude and repression exploded all at once, as if she were trying to compensate in seconds for a lifetime of emotional deprivation. When they separated, both were breathless. Emma looked at him with wide eyes, as if she had just discovered a new continent. "Is that how you kissed her?" The question came out before she could control herself, and immediately her eyes filled with horror at her own tactlessness. But Ethan wasn't offended. Instead, he took her face between his hands and looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her tremble. "I've never kissed anyone like that in my life, Emma. Never." And as he said it, he realized it was absolutely true. What he had just felt was completely new, completely different from any previous experience. It was as if he had just awakened from decades of sleep. The days following the first kiss were sweet and prolonged torture. Emma and Ethan worked side by side in the workshop, with an electric tension that seemed to make the very air vibrate around them. Each accidental touch, each glance that lingered a second longer than necessary, each word spoken in a lower tone than needed, fueled a fire that neither knew how to control. Ethan discovered that Emma was a relentless teacher when it came to the craft. She made him redo entire pieces because of imperfections he couldn't even see, corrected his posture hundreds of times a day, and never accepted anything less than absolute perfection. But there was something new in her teaching methods, a physical proximity that hadn't existed before, touches that lasted a few seconds beyond necessary, instructions whispered very close to his ear. "You're learning fast," she commented one afternoon, while examining a silver bracelet he had finished. Her hands touched his as she turned the piece in the light, analyzing every detail. "Your hands are no longer those of a man who's never worked." Ethan looked at his own hands. now calloused and marked by small cuts and burns that he carried like medals of honor. "You've changed me," he said simply. Emma raised her eyes to meet his, and for a moment the intensity of the gaze was so strong that they both forgot how to breathe. It was she who always broke these moments, returning to work with an almost desperate determination, as if she were afraid of what might happen if she completely surrendered to that feeling growing between them. But Ethan was becoming impatient with his own limitations. He had started a secret project, a ring different from anything he had created before. He worked on it only when Emma went out for lunch or to shop in the village, hiding it in a special drawer in the workbench. It was a complex piece, made of white gold and intertwined silver, with a design that had emerged in his dreams, 3 circles that touched without ever completely merging. On one of those afternoons, while working on the secret ring, Ethan made a discovery that froze his blood. In an old drawer of the workbench, hidden behind rusty tools, he found a folder of documents yellowed by time. Curiosity was stronger than good sense, and he opened the folder. The first document was like a punch to the stomach. It was a death certificate dated 24 years ago, in the name of Hope Mitchell Morgan. Morgan, the surname he carried, the name that opened doors and moved mountains in the business world, was there, linking Emma to his family in a way he had never imagined possible. His hands trembled as he leafed through the other documents. There was Emma's birth certificate, listing the mother as unknown and the father as Benjamin Morgan, a name that Ethan immediately recognized as his uncle, his father's younger brother, who had disappeared from family records decades ago. The last piece of the puzzle was in an old black-and-white photo, a man with familiar features embracing a young and beautiful woman, both smiling at the camera. On the back, an inscription in cursive, "Benjamin and Mary Ellen, Blue Ridge Mountains, 1999. The woman in the photo had the same eyes as Emma, the same delicate curve of her face. Ethan sat heavily in the workbench chair, trying to process the information. Emma was his cousin, daughter of the uncle whom the family had disowned for falling in love with an unsuitable woman and abandoning the family fortune to live in the countryside. The man who had been erased from the records as if he had never existed. "What are you doing?" Emma's voice behind him made him jump as if he had received an electric shock. She was standing at the door, holding a shopping bag, with an expression that mixed surprise and growing fury. Ethan tried to hide the documents, but it was too late. Emma dropped the bag and approached him with quick steps, tearing the papers from his hands with a violence he had never seen in her. "You had no right," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "These are private things from my family." "Emma, I can explain," he began, but she interrupted him with an abrupt gesture. "Explain what? That you were snooping through my life? That you thought you had the right to go through my things?" She quickly leafed through the documents, as if wanting to make sure he had seen everything. "That man in the photo," Ethan said softly, pointing to the image. "Benjamin. He was my uncle." Emma stopped moving. The information took a few seconds to be processed, and when it finally reached her brain, the result was devastating. She looked at the photo, then at Ethan, then back at the photo. "Your uncle," she repeated, her voice coming out in a thread. "My father's brother. He disappeared from the family when I was a child. My grandfather disinherited him for getting involved with a woman he considered unsuitable. We never heard from him again." Ethan stood up slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might attack at any sudden movement. "Emma, this means we're cousins," she finished the sentence, and the words came out like a death sentence. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked at him as if she were seeing a stranger, as if all the weeks of growing closeness had been erased in a single revelation. Ethan could see the exact moment when she began to close herself off again, the emotional walls rising around her like a fortress. "Did you know?" she asked, and there was a coldness in her voice that made him take a step back. "No. I swear I didn't know. When I saw the symbol on the floor, I began to suspect, but I never imagined—" He gestured helplessly. "Emma, this doesn't change what I feel for you." "Doesn't change?" She laughed, a bitter sound that didn't match at all with the loving woman he had kissed a few days before. "Doesn't change the fact that we're relatives, that all this is wrong? We're distant cousins, Emma. That's not a crime, it's not what? Not strange? Not disgusting?" She took the photo and looked at it with a growing expression of disgust. This man abandoned my pregnant mother to return to the rich family. She died in childbirth because she didn't have money for a decent hospital. And now you, his nephew, show up here and seduce me as if it were some kind of romantic destiny? The accusation hit him like a slap. I didn't know any of this, Emma, and I didn't seduce you. What happened between us was real. Real! She threw the documents on the workbench with contempt. What's real is that you're a Morgan, rich, powerful, accustomed to taking what you want, just like your uncle, and I'm just another poor and naive woman that you can use and abandon when you get tired. Ethan felt anger rise like bile in his throat. You know it's not like that. You know me, Emma. Do I? Or do I just know the version of you that you chose to show me? She crossed her arms, assuming a defensive posture that he recognized as her emotional armor. How many other women have you saved, Ethan? How many other poor widows received the honor of your attention? The comparison to Isabel was the last straw. Stop it, he said, his voice coming out harder than intended. You're not like Isabel, and you know it. No? Then why are you here? Why did you come specifically to this workshop, to this specific woman? Emma confronted him with an intensity that made him step back. Could it be fate, Ethan? Could it be the universe conspiring for the Morgan grandson to come looking for the family's lost daughter? Emma's question hung in the air like toxic smoke. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, seeing for the first time the woman behind the mask of serenity she always wore. There was the abandoned daughter, the orphan raised in hardness, the woman who had learned not to trust, because trusting meant being betrayed. You want to know the truth? He said, his voice low but firm. The truth is that I don't know why I'm here. Maybe it's fate. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's something worse. But I know one thing, what I feel for you has nothing to do with family obligation or ancestral guilt. Emma laughed again, that bitter sound that seemed to tear something inside him. What you feel for me? And what is that exactly? Pity? Desire to fix the mistakes of the past? Or just lust for an innocent virgin woman? The rawness of the words made him step back as if he had been slapped. Emma, stop. You're hurt and you're trying to hurt me too, but that won't solve anything. Solve what? There's nothing to solve. She moved away from him, placing the workbench between them like a physical barrier. You'll go back to New York to your rich life and I'll stay here alone as I've always been. The only difference is that now I know I'm even more stupid than I imagined. Ethan went around the bench, but she moved away again, keeping the distance between them. I won't abandon you. I'm not my uncle. No, then stay, marry me. Quit your company, your fortune, your important business, and stay here in this hole forgotten by God to make rings for country couples. She challenged him with her eyes, knowing exactly what the answer would be. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out. The question had been asked precisely to expose the impossibility of the situation. They lived in different worlds, had different responsibilities, were fundamentally different people. And now, with the revelation about their kinship, everything had become even more complicated. That's what I thought, Emma said in the face of his silence. Go away, Ethan. Go back to your real life and let me go back to mine. But he didn't move. Instead, he took from his pocket something that made her eyes widen, the ring he had been making in secret. It was a miniature work of art, 3 circles of different metals intertwined to create a hypnotic pattern that seemed to change in the light. I made this for you, he said, extending the ring, before I knew about our kinship, before I knew about anything. I made it because when I look at you, I see something I've never seen before. A woman who doesn't want anything from me other than what I really am. Emma looked at the ring as if it were a poisonous snake. And what are you really, Ethan? A broken man trying to fix himself, a widower carrying guilt that maybe he can never pay, someone who spent his entire life pretending to be strong when in reality he's just haunted. He took a step toward her. But with you, I feel whole. For the first time in years, I feel alive. Feelings don't change facts, she replied, but her voice had lost some of its hardness. We're still cousins. I still come from a world you would never truly understand. So what if we're cousins? That doesn't make our feelings any less real. Ethan continued, approaching slowly. As for our different worlds, you're right. I'll never completely understand what it's like to grow up having nothing, but you'll also never understand what it's like to have everything and feel that it means nothing." Emma was silent for a long moment, looking alternately at the ring in his hand and at his face. "Why haven't you left yet? Most men would have run." "Because I'm not most men, and because—" He hesitated, fighting against years of emotional conditioning that had taught him never to show vulnerability. "Because I love you, Emma. I love you in a way I didn't know was possible. And I'm not giving up on us just because we discovered that our great-grandparents might have shared the same last name." The words came out like a confession, wrenched by force, raw and desperate. Emma looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher: surprise, fear, desire, all mixed in a whirlwind of emotions. "You don't love me," she said finally, but her voice trembled slightly. "You love the idea of saving me. You love the fantasy of being the prince who rescues the damsel." "Then prove me wrong," he challenged, coming so close that he could feel her breath. "Kiss me now, and tell me you don't feel anything. Look me in the eyes and convince me that all this was just charity on your part." Emma stared at him for a long moment, and he saw the battle fought in her eyes, desire fighting against reason, love fighting against fear. When she finally moved, it was to step away from him again. "I can't," she whispered. "Even if I wanted to, I can't. There are things about me you don't know, Ethan. Things your family did to mine that go far beyond what your uncle did to my mother." "What things?" Emma went to the trunk where she kept the necklace, and from there retrieved another document that he hadn't seen before. It was a letter, yellowed by time, written in a delicate feminine handwriting. "This is a letter from my mother to Grandma Hope, written shortly before she died." Emma held the paper with trembling hands. "She tells the truth about what happened to Benjamin, about why he really left." Ethan took the letter with equally trembling hands. The handwriting was difficult to decipher, but some phrases jumped from the page like stabs. "He said he loved me, but when the family found out about the baby, they offered money for him to abandon me. 3 million for him to come back and never look for us again. He took the money, Hope, took it and disappeared as if he had never existed." The paper slipped from Ethan's hands as if it were on fire. "Emma, now do you understand?" She took the letter back and folded it carefully. "Your family didn't just abandon my mother. They paid for it to happen. They bought my father like he was an object, and he sold himself without thinking twice about the woman he claimed to love, or the daughter she was expecting." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain that had begun to fall outside, drumming on the workshop roof like impatient fingers. Ethan suddenly felt exhausted, as if the weight of generations of family mistakes had collapsed on his shoulders all at once. "What do you want me to do?" he finally asked. "I can't undo what my family did. I can't bring your mother back, or force my uncle to be a better man than he was." "I want you to leave," Emma replied, but there were tears in her eyes for the first time since he had met her. "I want you to get out of my life before I make the same mistake my mother did, and fall in love with a man who can't stay." "And if I can stay?" The question caught her off guard. "What? What if I quit everything? The company, the money, the life in New York? What if I stay here with you?" Ethan grabbed her hands before she could pull away. "What if I prove I'm not like my uncle?" Emma looked at him as if he had completely lost his mind. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." He squeezed her hands in his. "Marry me, Emma, here now as we are. And let's build something new on the ruins of what our families destroyed." The marriage proposal echoed through the workshop like a gunshot. Emma pulled her hands from his as if she had been burned, backing up until she hit the stone wall. Her eyes were wide, a mixture of desire and terror that broke Ethan's heart. "You're crazy," she whispered. "Completely." "Maybe," he admitted, but didn't back down. "Maybe that's what I needed, to be crazy enough to do something that really matters for the first time in my life." "Ethan, you don't understand. It's not just about the money or about us being cousins. It's about—" She gestured helplessly, trying to find words for something she didn't know how to express. "It's about me not knowing how to be loved. About me not knowing how to love someone without destroying everything. Then we'll learn together." He approached again, more slowly this time. "Emma, I killed my wife with my coldness. You think I know how to love without destroying, but maybe that's what we need. To learn from each other, to make mistakes together, to build something new on the ruins of what we are." The rain outside intensified, and a distant thunderclap made the workshop windows tremble. Emma looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw the exact moment when her defenses began to crumble. It was like watching a dam break. First some cracks, then the complete collapse. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice so low he almost didn't hear. "I'm afraid of you waking up one day and realizing you made a terrible mistake. I'm afraid of giving myself completely and you abandoning me like my father abandoned my mother." Ethan came close enough to touch her face, and this time she didn't pull away. "And I'm afraid of being the man I've always been. I'm afraid of being too cold, too selfish, of not being able to love you the way you deserve." He rested his forehead against hers. "But I'm even more afraid of living the rest of my life knowing I let you slip away out of cowardice." Emma closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel his warmth, the solidity of his presence. "If we do this, there's no going back. No civilized divorce, no friendly separation. It's forever or it's nothing." "Forever," he repeated without hesitation. She opened her eyes and found him looking at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Even knowing I'm your cousin, even knowing what your family did to mine, especially because of that." Ethan took the ring he had created and held it between them. "Let me fix what my family broke. Let me love you the way my uncle should have loved your mother." Emma looked at the ring, then at him, then at the ring again. It was the most beautiful piece she had ever seen, and she knew jewelry like few others. The work was perfect, but more than that, there was love in every curve, in every detail. It was the materialization of a feeling in precious metal. "All right," she said finally, and the words came out like a sigh. "All right." Ethan looked at her without completely believing what he had heard. "All right, what?" "Marry me." Emma extended her left hand, trembling slightly. "But here, in this workshop, in our way. No priests, no papers, no witnesses except fire and metal. Just the two of us and a promise." He slid the ring onto her finger with almost religious reverence. The piece fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for that hand, which, in truth, it had been. The three intertwined circles gleamed in the lamplight, seeming to capture all the light of the workshop. "I, Ethan Morgan," he began, holding her hands, "promise to love you, Emma, with all the broken parts of my soul. I promise to stay when it's difficult, to fight when necessary, and never, never to abandon you as my uncle abandoned your mother." Emma felt tears stream down her face, tears she had stored up through years of solitude and abandonment. "I, Emma Mitchell, promise to love you even when you're impossible. I promise to teach you to work not just with metal, but with your heart. And I promise not to run when fear knocks at the door." When they kissed, it was different from all the other times. There was no more hesitation, no more doubts. It was a kiss between people who had decided to bet everything on a single card, who had chosen love despite all the obstacles the world placed in their way. They separated breathless, and Emma laughed for the first time since Ethan had met her, a genuine free sound that filled the workshop like music. "So now what? Are we really married?" "We're married in the only way that matters," he replied, spinning her in his arms in an improvised dance. "In the heart, in the soul, in the hands that work together." The celebration was interrupted by a strong knock on the workshop door. Both turned, surprised, and saw a female silhouette through the glass fogged by rain. Emma frowned. No one came to the workshop at that hour, especially in the storm. Ethan opened the door and found himself facing a woman who made his blood freeze. Tall, blonde, dressed in expensive clothes that somehow hadn't gotten wet in the rain, Victoria Whitman stood there like an apparition from the past he had tried to leave behind. "Hello, darling," she said, entering the workshop as if she owned the place. Her cold blue eyes swept the environment with barely disguised contempt before settling on Emma. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Emma instinctively felt that this woman represented danger. There was something in her posture, in her calculated smile, that made her take a step toward Ethan in a protective gesture. "Victoria," Ethan said, his voice coming out tenser than intended. "What are you doing here?" "I've come to get you, of course." She took a silk handkerchief from her purse and pretended to dry herself, despite being completely dry. "Your partners are worried. You disappeared weeks ago, don't answer calls, don't respond to emails. Some are even speculating whether you've had a nervous breakdown." "I didn't disappear. I'm exactly where I need to be." Ethan positioned himself slightly in front of Emma, in an instinctive gesture of protection. Victoria smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh yes, playing craftsman in the countryside. Her eyes fixed on the ring on Emma's hand, and Ethan saw the exact moment when she understood the situation. How interesting. And you must be... Emma, she replied, lifting her chin in a show of courage she didn't completely feel. And you are? Victoria Whitman, Ethan's fiancée. The lie came out so naturally that for a moment, even Ethan doubted himself. Ex-fiancée, he corrected quickly. Ex-everything, actually. Technical details, Victoria shrugged. The important thing is that I came here personally to take you back home, to real life. She looked around the workshop again, and the disdain in her expression was like a slap in Emma's face. I'm sure it was an educational experience, but it's lasted long enough. Emma felt as if she were watching her own world crumble. This woman was everything she wasn't, elegant, sophisticated, belonging to Ethan's world in a way she never would. And from the way she spoke, as if Ethan's presence there were just a passing phase, Emma realized that perhaps she had been too naive. Ethan isn't going anywhere, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. He's with me now. Victoria laughed, a crystalline and cruel sound. Oh, darling, it's adorable that you think so. She approached Emma like a predator who had found easy prey. But do you really think a man like Ethan is going to give up an empire worth millions to play house with you in this place? The question hit all of Emma's insecurities like precise arrows. She looked at Ethan, expecting him to immediately deny it, to send Victoria away, to reaffirm everything they had promised each other minutes before. But what she saw in his eyes was hesitation. The hesitation in Ethan's eyes lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough time for Victoria to smile like a snake that had found its prey's weak spot. Emma felt something die inside her. It wasn't love, because that still pulsed painfully in her chest, but it was the hope that perhaps this time things could be different. I'll let you two talk, Emma said, trying to maintain her dignity intact. She took off her apron and hung it on the hook with mechanical movements. I need to check the furnace. Emma, no. Ethan tried to grab her arm, but she dodged with the agility of someone who had learned to escape from pain. It's not what you're thinking. I'm not thinking anything, she lied, heading to the back of the workshop where the heavier equipment was kept. You have matters to resolve. Victoria watched Emma's retreat with poorly disguised satisfaction. When they were alone in the main part of the workshop, she approached Ethan with the confidence of someone who knows all his weak points. She's pretty, Victoria commented casually, examining the tools on the bench as if they were museum curiosities. In a rustic way, I can understand the attraction. Must have been refreshing after everything that happened with Isabel. Don't mention Isabel, Ethan said through his teeth, and don't talk about Emma as if she were a pastime. Isn't she? Victoria turned to face him, her blue eyes shining with a dangerous light. Then explain something to me. If she means that much to you, why haven't you told your partners that you're resigning? Why is your bank account still active? Why do you still keep the apartment in New York? Each question was a precise stab. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but realized he didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse. I need time to organize things. Time? Victoria laughed. Darling, you have 42 days to decide whether to sign the contract with the Japanese or lose the deal of the century. You have 3 weeks before the shareholders' meeting, where they'll decide if you continue as CEO or if the company passes to other hands. You have responsibilities that can't simply be abandoned. In the back of the workshop, Emma heard every word as if they were nails being hammered into the coffin of her illusions. Of course he couldn't simply give up everything. Of course there were contracts, responsibilities, people depending on him. Of course she had been naive enough to believe that love could overcome all these practical and complicated things. Besides, Victoria continued, lowering her voice to a more intimate tone, do you really think you'll be happy here, making wedding rings for hillbillies? You who commanded empires, who made decisions that moved millions. She approached him until they were almost touching. You will wither here, Ethan. You will become a shadow of what you always were. Maybe that's what I want, he replied, but his voice didn't sound convincing even to himself. No, it's not. Victoria placed her hand on his chest in a gesture that seemed intimate but was calculatedly public. She knew Emma could see them. I've known you for years. I know your ambition, your need for power, to be in control. You may be in love with her now, but in 6 months, when the novelty wears off, you'll look around and realize you've wasted your life." Emma couldn't stay hidden anymore. She came out from behind the equipment and faced the two, seeing Victoria's hand on Ethan's chest as if it were a mark of possession. "She's right," Emma said, her voice coming out firmer than she felt inside. "About everything." Ethan pulled away from Victoria as if he had received a shock. "Emma." "No. No, Ethan. She's right." Emma crossed her arms, assuming the defensive posture he knew well. "You have a life in New York, responsibilities, an entire world that depends on you. And I have this workshop, this village, this simple life that you'll never really be able to understand." "That doesn't matter," he said, desperate. "None of that matters more than us." "Yes, it does." Emma took the ring off her finger, with a movement that seemed to tear off a piece of her soul along with it. "It matters because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life wondering if you stayed with me out of love or out of guilt. I won't be the woman who prevented you from being who you really are." She extended the ring to him, but Ethan backed away as if it were poisonous. "I won't take that back." "Then I'll keep it," Emma said, closing her hand around the piece, "as a memento of what could have been." Victoria observed the scene with growing satisfaction, but had the good sense to keep her mouth shut. She knew she had won, but also knew that any word could undo her victory. "Go," Emma said to Ethan, each word costing a piece of her soul. "Go back to your real life, to where you belong." "My place is here," he insisted, but even he could hear the lack of conviction in his own voice. "Your place is where you can be useful to the world, where you can make a difference. And it's not here, with me, in this forgotten hole." Emma turned so he wouldn't see the tears that were starting to fall. "Please, just go. Don't make this harder than it already is." Ethan stood still for a long moment, torn between two lives, two worlds, two versions of himself. He could feel Victoria behind him, radiating silent satisfaction. He could feel Emma in front of him, radiating a pain he had caused, and he could feel, growing inside him, the suffocating weight of the responsibilities he had tried to forget. "I'll come back," he said finally, his voice coming out hoarse. "When I resolve everything there, I'll come back." Emma didn't turn around. "Don't come back, Ethan. Don't come back, because in a few months I won't be here waiting anymore. Shall move on. I'll find someone who can really stay, not just in the spare hours between one business meeting and another." The words hit him like punches to the stomach. "Emma." "Go," she repeated, this time with a firmness that admitted no discussion. "Just go." Victoria touched Ethan's arm gently. "Come, darling. The car is waiting." He looked one last time at Emma, who remained with her back turned, rigid as a statue. He wanted to run to her, take her in his arms, do anything to undo that terrible moment. But his feet seemed stuck to the floor, and his mind was divided between what he wanted to do and what he knew he should do. "Take care," he said finally, and the words came out like a final farewell. Emma waited until she heard the sound of the car driving away before allowing herself to collapse. She fell to her knees on the cold floor of the workshop, pressing the ring against her chest as if it were a talisman against pain. But there was no talisman in the world that could protect her from what she felt. The most real love of her life had just walked out the door, taking with it any possibility of happiness she might have imagined. Outside on the dirt road that led back to the real world, Ethan looked through the rear window of Victoria's car, watching the workshop light diminish in the distance until it became just a golden point lost in the darkness of the mountain. Inside his chest, something had broken, something he suspected he would never be able to fix. "You did the right thing," Victoria said, but her voice sounded distant. "In a few months you'll realize it was the best decision of your life." Ethan didn't respond. He just kept looking back at the light that was becoming smaller and smaller, carrying with it the only woman who had managed to make his heart truly beat again. 3 months passed like an interminable grey fog. Emma had transformed pain into fuel, working 14 hours a day, creating jewelry with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Her hands, always skillful, now seemed possessed by an urgency she couldn't explain. Each ring she made carried a bit of the anguish she couldn't express in words. Each necklace was a silent prayer to a god who seemed to have abandoned her. The entire village had noticed the change. Emma had always been reserved, but now she was almost ghostly. She appeared at the market only to buy essentials, no longer participated in church festivals, didn't accept the timid invitations from local young men who, encouraged by her apparent availability, tried to win her attention. Mrs. Martha was so worried that she appeared at the workshop almost daily, with excuses to check if Emma was eating properly. "Girl, you're going to turn to dust if you continue like this," the woman commented one Thursday afternoon, bringing a plate of food that Emma had barely touched. "Ever since that man left, you look like a ghost." Emma didn't respond, continuing to hammer a piece of silver with mechanical and precise movements. She had learned that work was the only thing that kept the ghosts at bay, the only way not to think about dark eyes and calloused hands that had touched her skin as if she was sacred. In New York, Ethan had plunged into work with a ferocity that frightened even his most ambitious partners. He had closed the deal with the Japanese, expanded the business to 2 new countries, and increased the company's profits by 40%. On the surface, he was the CEO of any shareholder's dreams. Underneath, he was a man being consumed from within. Nights were the worst. In the silence of his penthouse apartment, surrounded by the luxury that had once signified success, he found himself thinking about the smell of heated metal and the rhythmic sound of hammer against anvil. He dreamed of small, calloused hands, of brown eyes that saw him not as a magnate but as a man. He woke up sweaty and desperate, feeling as if he had lost not only Emma, but a fundamental part of himself. Victoria had tried to resume the relationship, obviously. She appeared at business dinners hanging on his arm, made subtle comments about marriage for press impressions, acted as if they were an established couple. But Ethan treated her with a coldness that made even her, a master of manipulation, step back. There was something in his eyes that wasn't there before, a hardness she couldn't penetrate, as if he had built steel walls around his heart. It was on a rainy Friday that everything changed. Ethan was in his meeting room, signing contracts that would move millions, when his secretary knocked on the door with a strange expression on her face. "Mr. Morgan, there's a call for you." The person said, "It's about the workshop." Ethan's heart stopped for a second. In 3 months, he had resisted the temptation to call, to send news, any form of contact. He had respected Emma's request not to return. But now someone was calling about the workshop, and his mind immediately ran to the worst possible scenarios. "Put the call through," he said, his voice coming out harsher than intended. The voice on the other end of the line was that of an older woman, with a heavy Appalachian accent. "Mr. Morgan, this is Martha from the boarding house where you stayed. Mrs. Martha, did something happen to—" He hesitated, not having the courage to pronounce the name. "To Emma?" "Nothing happened. No, sir. At least not the way you're thinking." There was a pause on the other end. "But she's not well, you know. Since you left, she's become a shadow. Doesn't eat right, doesn't talk to anyone, just works. Works like a condemned woman." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a familiar pain spread through his chest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm an old woman who's seen many people suffer from love, and I recognize when 2 people are killing themselves with longing for each other." Her voice became firmer. "This girl has never had anything in life, sir. Never had affection. Never had a real family, never had love. You arrived here and for the first time I saw her really smile. And now I've ruined everything." Ethan finished the sentence. "I don't know if you ruined it or if you're just being a coward," Mrs. Martha replied with the frankness typical of someone who has nothing to lose. "But if you really love this girl as I think you do, then stop hiding there in New York and come get her. It's not that simple." "Of course it is." The interruption came firmly. "Love is simple, Mr. Morgan. Complicated is pride, is fear, is cowardice. Love is simple. You love, you fight. You don't love, you disappear. But staying in the middle, suffering from afar and letting her suffer too, that's just cruelty." The call ended, but the words continued to echo in Ethan's mind for the rest of the day. That night, alone in his apartment, he found himself in front of a mirror, looking at a man he didn't completely recognize, rich, powerful, successful, and completely empty. His reflection was interrupted by his cell phone ringing. It was Victoria. "Darling, I need to talk to you. It's urgent." There was something in her voice that put him on alert. "Can you come to my apartment? It's about... well, it's better we talk in person." An hour later, Ethan was in Victoria's luxurious living room, watching her serve 2 glasses of wine with studied elegance. She wore a black dress that accentuated every curve. her blonde hair perfectly arranged, her makeup impeccable. She was beautiful, in the classic style that had always attracted him. But looking at her now, he felt absolutely nothing. "Sit," she said, offering a glass that he refused. "We need to talk about your little romance in the countryside." The mention of Emma made Ethan's muscles tense. "What are you talking about?" Victoria smiled, that calculated smile he was learning to hate. "I hired a private investigator to find out more about your craftswoman. What we discovered is fascinating." She went to a table where photographs and documents were spread out. Ethan approached reluctantly, and what he saw made his blood freeze. "Emma Mitchell isn't just your distant cousin, darling." Victoria picked up a birth certificate and extended it to him. "According to our investigator, she is the daughter of Benjamin Morgan, yes, but the mother wasn't just any country woman." Ethan took the document with trembling hands. "Mary Ellen Whitman." He read the name of Emma's mother, and something clicked in his mind. "Whitman, like Dr. Thomas?" "The very one." Victoria couldn't hide the satisfaction in her voice. "Dr. Thomas Whitman is Emma's uncle, and it was he who sent you there. Don't you find that an interesting coincidence?" Ethan's world seemed to spin around itself. "You're saying that—" "I'm saying you were manipulated from the beginning." Victoria approached him, her eyes shining with triumph. "The therapist knew the family history, knew about the connection between you. He sent you there on purpose, probably as some kind of sick psychological experiment or maybe even blackmail." Ethan sat heavily in an armchair, trying to process the information. Had it all been a game? Had Emma known from the beginning who he was? Had the love he felt for her, that he still felt, been just part of an elaborate manipulation? "This doesn't change anything," he said finally. But his voice sounded less convincing than he would have liked. "Doesn't change? Ethan, you were used, both by this doctor and possibly by her." Victoria knelt beside the armchair, taking his hands. "Think about it. What coincidence would it be for you, precisely you, to seek help from the only therapist who had a family connection with a woman lost in the countryside?" The doubts planted by Victoria began to grow like weeds in Ethan's mind. Had Emma always known who he was? Had all that innocence, all that surprise at discovering their kinship been just an act? But then he remembered her eyes when they discovered the truth. He remembered the genuine pain, the anger, the way she had pulled away from him. No actress in the world would be that good. "No," he said, standing up abruptly. "Emma didn't know anything. I saw the surprise in her eyes, saw the pain when she discovered our kinship. She wasn't pretending. Are you sure?" Victoria stood up too, not giving up. "Are you sure you weren't being manipulated by two people who knew your guilt about Isabel and decided to exploit that?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, seeing for the first time with total clarity what Victoria really was, a cold and calculating woman who was willing to destroy any chance of happiness for him to keep him under control. "You know what, Victoria?" he said, his voice coming out with a dangerous calm. "Even if all this is true, even if I was manipulated from the first day, I still prefer to have been deceived by Emma than to spend one more day being manipulated by you." Victoria's face contorted in an expression of fury and despair. "Ethan, you can't be serious. After everything we discovered." "What we discovered is that perhaps fate has a strange way of fixing the mistakes of the past." He headed to the door, but turned before leaving. "And that I wasted 3 months of my life trying to convince myself that I could live without her. If you go after her now, don't come looking for me when it goes wrong," Victoria shouted at his back. "I won't need to," Ethan replied without turning, "because this time I'm going to make it work." Ethan drove through the night like a possessed man, the city lights giving way to the stars of the countryside as he moved away from New York. On the passenger seat was a folder with his signed letter of resignation, the documents transferring his shares to an investment fund, and a power of attorney giving his lawyers full power to liquidate his assets. He had made the most important decisions of his life in a single night, driven by a clarity he hadn't felt for months. The BMW purred on the dirt road that led to the village, but this time Ethan didn't feel fear of the unknown. He felt only the desperate urgency of a man who had almost lost the only treasure that really mattered. When the lights of the workshop appeared around the mountain bend, his heart raced as if he were a teenager on a first date. It was 4 in the morning when he parked in front of the workshop. The golden light that always emanated from the windows was there, as if Emma had never stopped working. He stayed in the car for a moment, observing her silhouette bent over the workbench, her hair tied up any which way. The precise but tired movements of someone who had transformed work into an escape from reality. When he finally got out of the car, the sound of the door slamming echoed in the quietness of dawn. Emma raised her head, and even through the fogged glass, Ethan could see the exact moment when she recognized him. He saw her stiffen, saw her hands stop in mid-movement, saw her prepare for another emotional battle. He pushed the door slowly, as he had done the first time, and was greeted by the same smell of heated metal and fire that had become the perfume of happiness in his memory. Emma didn't turn. She continued working on the piece in front of her, but her hands trembled slightly. "Mrs. Martha's boarding house doesn't have any more vacant rooms," she said without looking at him, her voice coming out hoarser than intended. "You'll have to look elsewhere." "I don't need a room," Ethan replied, approaching slowly. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma finally turned, and he felt as if he had been punched in the stomach when he saw her. She had lost weight. There were dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that didn't exist before, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, still made his heart race with just one look. "Ethan, we already talked about this. You have your life, I have mine. There's nothing more to discuss." She crossed her arms in a defensive posture he knew well. "Yes, there is." He took the folder from the car and placed it on the workbench. "There's a lot to discuss, starting with the fact that I sold everything." Emma looked at the folder as if it were a bomb. "Sold what?" "Everything. The company, the apartment, the stocks, the investments, everything." Ethan opened the folder and spread the documents on the workbench. "I transferred control of the company to the other partners, liquidated my assets, and came here with a suitcase of clothes and a bank account with enough money to buy a simple house and live a simple life beside the woman I love." Emma picked up one of the documents with trembling hands, reading the official information that confirmed exactly what he had said. "You've completely lost your mind," she whispered. "Maybe. Or maybe I've finally regained my sanity." Ethan approached her until they were just inches apart. "Emma, I spent 3 months trying to convince myself that I could live without you. 3 miserable months pretending that working 14 hours a day could fill the hole you left in my life. Ethan, let me finish." He took her hands, calloused and stained with metal, and kissed them with a reverence that made her tremble. "I discovered some things about how we met. About your Uncle Thomas, about how he sent me to you on purpose. And you know what I thought when I found out?" Emma shook her head, not trusting her own voice. "I thought, how lucky I am that someone in the universe cared enough to push me in the direction of happiness." Ethan smiled, that smile she had missed so much. "It doesn't matter how it began, Emma. What matters is how it ends, and I want it to end with us together. Old and happy in this workshop or anywhere in the world where you want to be. You can't have sold everything because of me," she said, but there were tears in her eyes. "You can't have destroyed your life because of the love of my life," Ethan interrupted. "Because of the only woman who made me feel truly alive. Because of the person who taught me that wealth isn't what you have in your bank account, but what you have in your heart." Emma fell apart. 3 months of pain, of loneliness, of sleepless nights wishing he would come back, crumbled all at once. She threw herself into his arms, and Ethan held her as if she were the last solid thing in a crumbling world. "I missed you every day," she confessed through tears. "Every minute of every day." "Never again," he promised, kissing the top of her head. "We'll never be separated again." They kissed with the desperation of someone who had been lost and finally found the way home. It was different from previous kisses. There was a new urgency, a certainty that this time nothing and no one would separate them. "Marry me," Ethan said when they separated, breathless. "For real this time. With papers, with a celebration, with all the pomp you want, or with the simplicity you prefer. But marry me." Emma laughed through her tears. "Do you still have the ring?" In response, she opened a drawer in the workbench and from there retrieved the ring he had made, kept like a treasure during all those months. "I could never get rid of it." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger again, and this time they both knew it was forever. "I love you, Emma Mitchell. I love you with all the baggage, with all the complicated past, with all the simplicity and complexity of what we are together." "I love you too," she replied, admiring how the ring shone in the furnace light. "I love the rich man you were. I love the simple man you're becoming. But most of all, I love the man you are when you're with me." They spent the rest of the night planning a future that included an expanded workshop, a house built with their own hands, and perhaps in the near future, children running among the tools while learning to transform raw metal into art. 6 months later, the Morgan Mitchell workshop had become famous in 3 states for its unique jewelry, each piece telling a story of love that overcame impossible obstacles. Ethan had discovered that he had a natural talent, not only for creating jewelry, but for the crafting business, combining his business experience with Emma's ancestral tradition to create something completely new. Emma wore the engagement ring every day, but her index finger boasted an even more special wedding band, a piece they had forged together on the morning of their wedding, mixing gold he had brought from New York with silver she had inherited from Grandma Hope. It was irregular, with marks from the 2 of them hammering alternately, imperfect in the eyes of any traditional jeweler. To them, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. On a Sunday afternoon, while Emma was teaching Ethan a new technique for setting stones, he stopped working and simply observed her. There was a different light in her eyes now, a joy he had never seen during his first weeks in the workshop. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing the intense look. "I'm thinking that maybe the guilt I carried about Isabel wasn't about not being able to save her," he said slowly. "Maybe it was about not being able to truly love her. And now that I know what it's like to truly love, I can finally forgive myself." Emma kissed him softly, a kiss that tasted of future and fulfilled promises. Outside the workshop, the mountain wind whispered among the trees, carrying with it stories of love that conquered fear, of courage that overcame convenience, and of 2 people who discovered that sometimes destiny needs a little help, but that true love always finds a way. Years later, when they told their story to the grandchildren who played with pieces of colored metal on the workshop floor, Emma always ended the same way. "And that's how we learned that it doesn't matter where you come from or where you're going. What matters is who you choose to make the journey with." Ethan always added, "And that sometimes the greatest wealth in the world isn't worth a single moment with the right person." The grandchildren rolled their eyes, as only children know how to do, but secretly hoped to find one day a love like their grandparents, a love that transformed metal into art, people into something greater than they were alone, and ordinary lives into stories worthy of being told forever.